1894, so a long time ago, that's when the first people went crawling down this way. And this was the only entrance to the cave back there. Do you all know what guano is? Yes, bat poo, yeah. Why would bat poo be valuable? Or why was it valuable in the 1890s? Fuel, did someone say? Not for fuel, but you're thinking in the right direction. There's a lot of agriculture in this area, and farmers were using it as fertiliser. Yeah, it's really good fertiliser.
How do they grow on the sides, like a tree, or how does that work?
That's a really good question. So up here we have a cluster of helictites, sideways growing speleothems, that are quite strange, and we don't understand everything to do with them, but we think that capillary action helps their growth, because the tube inside a helictite is so thin that water gets drawn through the tube against gravity. So what used to happen is there was movement in the limestones here, and we're at a point where there was an old fault line. Two sections of neighbouring limestone were lifting up at slightly different rates, and that caused a lot of vertical cracking in the rock to form. And the vertical cracks would let the water down very easily in some sections, and when it kept on coming down along the same path over, tens of thousands of years, eventually that water would dissolve away a pipe. So it would dissolve a hole similar to this one. Now, I think what this must mean for the animals that were up above. Some of you have already pointed out that there's a brown lid over the top. That's actually a rusty metal lid that's right on the ground above. But that's what used to happen. We had many of these solution pipes. Some of them were up to 1.4 metres across, and kangaroos and other animals would come tumbling down into the cave, and they would be trapped in the darkness. So they wouldn't find their way out. There's no food. It was actually starvation that got most of them in the end. But there's a much bigger set of holes. This was a kangaroo, but it was not the same as the kangaroos that we have today. It's still got the tail shape, it's got the classic kangaroo back leg. It only had one back toe, not three, so that was a bit strange. But the skull is the strangest part. It's got a very shortened face, and it looks short, not so much because it's actually shorter in overall length, but because the back of the skull is so stocky and the eyes are kind of a bit further forward that it makes the nose look really short. It looks like it's got a very pressed in nose. It's got a very broad skull at the back too. So comparing it with today's kangaroos, they're the most obvious noticeable differences in shape, but when you look at the teeth, you also find something interesting. They all start out as juvenile kangaroos, both the short-faced form like this and the long-faced kangaroos that we have today. They start out with teeth a bit like this. So they kind of look like that. They've got ridges in them that are quite pronounced, going across the jaw plane this way. But as today's kangaroos age, the insides of the teeth get worn down. So these points on the inside of the jaw are basically flattened right away. They don't even exist by the time these are adults. But the short-faced forms, we've found adults and even old arthritic individuals many times down here, they all have really good condition teeth at the back there, particularly on the inside of the jaw. They're not worn away at all. So scientists wanted to know what's causing the tooth wear in today's kangaroos. Turns out it's from the grass that they eat. Grass contains little bits of silica. It's like little sand grains. So as they're grinding on this sand throughout their lives, then it starts to wear the teeth away before they even reach full adulthood. The structure is actually quite heavy for the size of the animal. The pelvis and the back leg bones are actually a bit more heavily built than you would think they would need to be for a kangaroo of this length compared to the ones that are surviving. So it was a fairly stocky animal. But the short-faced, obviously, that's a very noticeable difference there. Now, the biggest short-faced kangaroo was Procoptodon goliah, and that thing got to more than 2 metres tall, and we think it could have reached up and even brung down sort of branches towards its face, maybe 3 metres high. So it's quite a tall animal, but some of the analysis of the particles in the teeth suggests that it was eating sort of some of the lower vegetation, maybe saltbush and things like that. So we don't understand a heck of a lot about these animals really, and there's still scope for adjustment there, and that's what drives our scientists to keep on researching these things down in caves like here. One of the animals that has really captured our fascination is this thing. Does anyone know what it is? Cheating. Yes, this is Thylacoleo carnifex, and that actually translates as pouched lion butcher. Are you getting a sense of its diet?
Yes.
Pouched lion butcher. So this thing we think was a carnivore. Have a look at those teeth. We've got big stabbing incisors at the front there, but look at the premolar. This tooth just inside, this is the premolar tooth, and that ridge in the tooth is running parallel to the jawbone there, not across this way. And it's a really big tooth, and there's another one in the upper jaw that matches it in its position. So when the jaw's closed, you would have had that lovely slicing going on each side. It also had plenty of jaw muscle, so you can see cavities like this in the side of the skull. This is where the masseter would fit. That's that muscle that is sort of on your cheek. If you've ever just pressed near your ear and it sort of clenched your jaw, you can feel that muscle pushing in and out. This animal had a really big masseter, but its temporalis was even larger, and the temporalis is associated with strong clamping bite force. And that would have filled all of this cavity behind the eye socket and gone down to the inside of the lower jaw. Would have pulled it up like that. That's what the temporalis muscle does. So, with the volume of muscle that fits into these cavities, and the proportions of the skull and the way the teeth are structured and the way the skull is hinged at the back and all of those sorts of things, scientists have developed models that can calculate the bite force pressure of these animals. And it turns out that this thing would have had bite force of nearly half a ton of pressure on those blade-like premolar teeth. Now that's right up there with the bite force of an African lion. So yeah, this is why we think it's a carnivore. It's definitely not looking like a herbivore, not with those teeth and that bite force and everything else. But there's some other interesting features of this animal. So we've got a fairly long forelimb here. It's definitely longer than the hind limb. And it's got a nice big ridge on the humerus bone here, and that's where you'd get muscle attached. So a nice big bicep or something there. It's actually got a sharp retractable claw on its thumb, and the thumbs could kind of close in a bit against the palms, sort of semi-opposable thumbs. Pretty cool. And those short hind limbs were probably no good for running, so we suspect if this was a predatory animal, that it would have been an ambush predator. Some people have said that, you know, these extra strong forelimbs, long strong forelimbs and these sharp retractable thumb claws, they would have been good for holding onto tree trunks perhaps, if it was a climbing animal. Would have been good for tackling prey for sure. But with short hind limbs and that sort of body plan, maybe it was a climbing animal. And it turns out that it had a nice tail as well, but we hadn't found the tail bones when we assembled this one in the 80s. We have found them in many specimens since then, and it could have well been a prehensile tail even. So think about a climbing sort of giant carnivorous possum, if you like, and you might have the currently most accepted scientific interpretation of this animal. It was a marsupial, like possums are. It had a pouch to raise its young in, and that might seem a little difficult to deduce from the bones, but actually it's not. This animal's got a really narrow pelvis for its size. How big are marsupial babies when they're born? Yeah, they're miniature little things, aren't they? So little baby kangaroos, they're not big at all. They go crawling through the fur on the mother's underside when they're born. And they find the opening to the pouch, they go in there, they attach to a teat, and that's where they do most of the growing. So to give birth, marsupial mothers don't need a very wide pelvis, and this thing has a strangely narrow one for the animal's overall size. It's too narrow for it to have been a placental mammal like most of the others that don't have a pouch. So there we have it.
Unfortunately, it's a little bit different tonight where you couldn't feel the temperature change, but that first temperature drop when we first came into this chamber, you probably felt that. Some of you more adventurous t-shirt and shorts, which is may have felt that temperature change just again as we entered into this chamber. So this chamber itself is what is called sometimes referred to as one of the wintering chambers where the bats go. So summer, they're all having their pups in bat cave, all hanging out in the room, nice and warm, which is counterintuitive because on hot days in the Australian hot summer, they prefer a hot cave for all their pups. And in the Australian winter, they prefer a cold cave. So it's a bit counterintuitive.
There's something flying over there.
Yep, and that looks like it could be.
Okay.
Doing their job.
So this is the full-grown one, no, right?
This is a fully grown one. So the babies, when they're first born, are about that big.
Oh my god!
So they're tiny.
So you see they spin around at the base of that pole, and then when one goes, of course the whole bunch of them start to go as well. So it is quite cool what they're going to do as well, yeah. So that's, I'm happy with camping now, because there was only the optical camera in there before, so without light in there, all you saw was like a black screen. I don't think I can follow on a bit of a tangent there, but sometimes you'll start to see little white eyes shine up. So it's not always the clearest pictures around. But they do have eyes and they can actually see through those eyes as they fly around as well. So they do use echolocation, so sending out that sound wave, having a bounce off the wall adolescent. So the pups were shielded away from us a little bit. A few of the guides have managed to find them, so what they like to do is put them up in a bit that's really well covered, nothing can really get in there. Sometimes our cameras are a bit obscured by a bit of limestone rock, just how it's all got. So what else I can actually do that some of them were, but these may be juveniles. It's a bit hard. I can't honestly tell. They could be, but they could also be hiding somewhere right up the top here. Yeah.
Should we tell them to hide?
Yeah, that is alive.
Hey.
That's cool. So, combination of echolocation and maybe a little bit of eyesight, but probably more echolocation. Because what you probably notice is they're quite attuned to what's around them. And as I said, close experience.